I was at a startup that got acquired by Google. The company was called Wildfire Interactive, 45, 50 million in revenue in just that short time, kind of in both worlds, part technology and part in accounting. You don't understand the idea of there being a lot of people until you go to a place like China and you realize, wow, there's freaking people everywhere.
So how many languages do you speak?
Uh, Two and a half.
Two and a half. Wait, how does that work?
Hello everyone, welcome. David, your host here for Leverage Asia. Hello folks, welcome to Leverage Asia.
Welcome to Leverage Asia, everybody.
How many more unicorns can Southeast Asia sustain?
Should more people be open to this kind of thing and leverage Asia in that kind of way? Or is this not meant for everybody?
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to yet another wonderful episode of Leverage Asia. We have yet another amazing guest today. Jesse, would you like to introduce yourself to the audience here?
Sure. My name is Jesse Lin. I am from the Los Angeles area. Originally born in Taiwan, moved to US when I was 3, lived on the East Coast for a little while in New Jersey, and then moved to Syracuse, New York before coming out to California. Went to UCLA and then moved to the San Francisco Bay Area to work in technology. So I was really fortunate in that in my time in the Silicon Valley Bay and in the Bay Area, I was at a startup that got acquired by Google. So I saw the whole ride from a small team in Palo Alto to hundreds of people across the world and offices across the world. So that was a really wild and interesting time. From there, I was fortunate to go lead finance for a few other software companies, and eventually led to me creating my own accounting firm, which I'm running today.
That's wonderful. That's quite a journey. That was a mouthful there. So can we rewind a little bit? I'd like to dig in a little and ask a little bit about that company that acquired by Google, right? Um, tell us a little more about that experience. What was the company called? How did you happen upon that company?
So that company was called Wildfire Interactive. And I had joined the company because the company that I was at previous to it was about to move its finance team to Boston, and was not really keen on moving at the time. So was comfortable staying in California. So I started looking around for another role, and Wildfire was a company where when I went to interview there, I didn't necessarily expect it to go where it ultimately ended up going. I just thought it was a really cool place to work. And one of the things that really stood out to me when I went on an interview was that you could feel this energy in the office that was a new thing to me, in that most of the places I had worked before were not quite as exciting. I would say it's the type of places where you could hear the lights hum, so not exactly the most fun places to be. And you could just feel this crazy energy within that office, and really a lot of cool people. So went into working at that company, and it was really wild ride. I think even though the time span there was maybe 2.5, 3 years, it felt like I worked double or triple that, because it's probably one of the hardest times I've had to work. But the company was ultimately successful. We grew to almost 500 people, from 10, 15 million in revenue all the way to 45, 50 million in revenue in just that short time. So it was crazy amount of growth and a lot of learning in that process.
A lot of learning in that process. If I were to ask you to summarize maybe one key takeaway from that experience, what would it be?
One key takeaway. I think the what has stood out to me the most over the years was how strong the culture of the company was. And that is something that stuck with me, in that when I go to any other company, I compare in terms of, oh, is the culture strong here? Why is it this way, or why is it not this way? And as I started my own company, those lessons stuck with me. So I think quite a bit about the culture of the company I'm creating, even though it's a lot smaller than what Wildfire ultimately became. It matters in terms of building a team where everyone is on the same page and enjoys being together.
That's really curious that you say that, because recently I wrote a little post on LinkedIn that said something along the lines of: a first-time founder focuses on product, a second-time founder focuses on distribution, a third-time founder focuses on culture,
So
right?
interesting.
Yeah, it's powerful, in fact. It makes you think quite a bit. In your case, that was that experience with Wildfire was a first startup that you joined, correct? Or second?
I had been at a couple other startups, but in the typical software startup type that you would associate on television and everything, that was probably the first one. Before it was something in telecommunications and in food and beverage, so seafood distribution.
I see. So you've been in other startups, but not a technical startup until then.
Yes, correct.
Gotcha. But you got this amazing insight that most, according to that statement I just shared with you, until your third time founder, most people don't realize that, the importance of culture. Um, can we dig in a little bit there? What do you think sets apart a company with great culture versus a company that kind of have a sucky culture? Yeah.
I mean, in my opinion, what really sets the companies apart is that when there's a strong culture, problems get solved more easily, and the pace is it's capable of being faster because people care about solving problems and working together, and they'll take the initiative to make that happen. Whereas in some companies where the culture is not so strong, you may have people trying to hold the team back or just simply not caring, and it could be a few people just dragging everyone else along. So what would be easy at a company with really great culture, at a company where the culture is not so strong, it could be unnecessarily difficult because that part of the company was not well thought out.
Why is it, do you think, now that, you've had such a long and distinct and various exposure and career, that so many founders and so many people don't see that about culture? Why do they take it for granted, you think, especially new founders?
Unless you've been in an experience where you know that, wow, the culture of this company is amazing and you know that it made a difference in the company's success, it may just assume that culture happens naturally and doesn't necessarily need nurturing or intent behind it. And sometimes people will lead with this mentality of I'll just work super hard and be a good role model for everyone, and everyone else will work really hard too. But creating good culture is more than that because it's not just about working really hard, but you also need to show that you care about the people that are working around you in addition to reaching that same goal together.
Mm. Actually, yeah, unless you've tasted it, you don't know it. You're absolutely right. That's what you're implying. Um,
Yes.
Okay, you know what? Rewinding again. Again, you had amazing and diverse experiences. So today, would you say that your identity, do you consider yourself, I'm a finance guy, I'm an accountant, I'm a creator? What title do you gravitate towards?
I typically say I'm an accountant just to make it easy because it's easy for most people to grasp. But it's funny in that that's a label I shied away from a really long time because while I was the accountant within the company, I didn't necessarily love what I was doing, even though I loved working at the company. And so that's a label that was hard for me to accept for a while, but it is what I know and what I'm good at. I do feel that I straddle that line between accounting and technology. Um, Always wanted to start a software company. And when I was working within the software companies, I usually sat with the engineers. So we'll learn a lot through that way. Went through a coding boot camp at one point to learn more about what it was like to build software on my own. So I knew how to lead development if I needed to. So and then I also had this experience at a payments company where I worked with engineering and product to really build out the platform and had a lot of say in it. So from that experience and in my time in Silicon Valley, that's why I have this feel that I'm kind of in both worlds, part technology and part in accounting.
Actually, there's so much you said there that I'm just curious about. If you don't mind, I'm just going to double click on one of the things you said about you shied away from embracing that accounting identity. Why is it? Is it because of accountants are labeled a certain stereotype? Is it, did you think something else was sexier, the label? I'm curious why. It's great to be an accountant, no?
yeah, now it seems like it doesn't really make sense. But I think back then, I had this perception that I wasn't useful to anyone outside the company and only useful to people within the company. And my view of the world was very limited in that I would focus on just within one organization. And it, I didn't really carry that identity with me wherever I went. So it wasn't necessarily something I was super proud of. I just felt like just like everyone else in terms of, oh, I just got a normal job at like a tech company like everyone else in the Bay Area. So it wasn't something that really excited me or I felt was exciting to share with other people. So it wasn't an identity that I tried to embrace all that much.
Okay, okay, I see. So you're kind of chalking it up to your youth at the time, correct?
A little bit, and it could also be that during those moments where it was really difficult, I often thought about, oh, is this what I should be doing? Is this the path I'm supposed to be on? Um, my in my family, my especially my father's side, my grandfather and then my father and his two brothers, they all had their own businesses when they were building their lives. And one of the things that stood out to me when I was young was thinking that, oh, one day this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to create a company like they did, and then it's supposed to be successful, and I'm supposed to live this good life, right? So, I mean, an ideal situation. So that stuck with me for a long time. And then when it was really difficult at some of these startup jobs, which they were really difficult, some of them were a crazy grind. I would question like, oh, why am I here? Is it like, should I really be doing this? Is there a career here? Should I be doing something else? I always told myself I'd be doing something else. So it was difficult to think that, oh, am I really going to stay here as an accountant or should I be doing this other thing that I thought I would always do? And what's funny is at one point I ended up having a interview by this guy who I realized, oh, this could be me in 20 years. And it was really, really fascinating. I really liked that guy. He even tried to teach me a few things in an interview. Um, but ultimately, I remember thinking like, oh, this guy I know has a good life. He's in a good place. But I don't think I want to do exactly what he's doing for the next 20 years or so. Um, yeah, so that was one of the things that stood out to me as I ended up making that transition into entrepreneurship. Is like, oh, okay, like one of the traps of Silicon Valley is that there's always this cooler, newer company to work for. New ideas, building the newest great thing, good salaries and packages, that compensation packages at that time. So there's always this shiny object to chase. But because of that interview with that guy and knowing the difficulty of working within a finance organization of a VC-backed startup, it's challenging. And it was not a path I wanted to continue down just because I knew exactly what it was going to be like and the difficulties of it. Didn't know if I was going to have the energy to do that for another 3, 4 startups. So wanted to commit to another direction because to me it was an important part of ultimately living a life that I had imagined.
Okay. You know, the reason I'm so fascinated about your initial impression of accounting and the label as an accountant is that one of my most adored mentors in my life, he is an accountant. He started his career as an accountant at Deloitte and, CPA, worked his way, became the CEO of CNA, one of the largest insurance company, commercial insurance company. He
Mhm.
was CFO, then CEO, the chairman of the board, and today he serves on what 13 public boards, including the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, and very, very well respected. That's just 13 public boards. He also serves on, I think, equal amount of private boards. He teaches and is on the board at Northwestern and U Chicago Booth School of Business, and so here's a man who perfected his craft in some ways, and from there went on to diversify, right? So I believe that accounting is such a core, amazing root skill. And if I were younger and somebody told me, hey, did you know that as an accountant, you can contribute to companies and XYZ and build your career and get to the very, very top? I would have seriously considered that. I just didn't know until it was well, way past my I was like in my mid 20s when I witnessed it. So that's why I'm a little taken aback Maybe that's why it's my experience. So today then, how has your perception changed? Is it similar to mine now? What I just described for you? Is it your view of accounting and that label, is it much more positive? Or is it still the same? Or where is it at?
Well, it's much more positive in that instead of viewing that I'm only useful within one organization, I have the ability to help anyone now. And I think maybe that's like an entrepreneur thing where you realize like, oh, I have something or a skill set or a product that can help the world. And so it's no longer I just focus within my organization. I can focus on everyone, all opportunities, getting to know people doing all sorts of different things to see if I can help them on their journey, or if not, connect them to people who I think can help them on their journey. So it's become a total change in that way. And before, when I was in early in my career, I would not enjoy going to networking events and things of that nature. But now I go to plenty of them all the time, and it's become a lot easier than before. In that I definitely feel much more comfortable in that kind of setting, and I actually do enjoy meeting a lot of cool people, and have met a lot of cool people over the last few years as I started going on this journey.
Sounds like it's like full circle now, like you're comfortable with that term. But let's take again 3 steps back. I know you as an entrepreneur, frankly. So again, I was surprised, oh, accountant. And that's not that surprising just because I know that you have your fingers dipped in there. But I
Mhm.
know you as an entrepreneur. So could you actually tell me a little bit more about your journey into entrepreneurship?
Sure. Well, I think part of it was that one interview I had told you about where the guy who I thought would be me in 20 years interviewed me, and I that was like a wake up call to tell me like, hey, you better figure out going another direction at some point. At the time, it was really difficult though because I was experimenting with different ideas and not also looking at jobs at the time. And what I realized later on was, oh, I'm not committing to anything, and that's why I'm not really getting any good results. I think this is true anywhere in life. Is when you don't have a commitment towards something, getting true results in that area is a little difficult because you haven't decided that this is the journey you're going to take. And at some point, I just decided that this is something I must do, in that if I didn't make a real attempt to go down the entrepreneurial path, there would probably be a lot of regret later on, and then I always could go back to my technology jobs. Like that was always going to be there. Somehow in my head, sometimes I would think maybe it wouldn't be, but like it would always be there if I ever really needed to go back. So I remember talking to a friend who was going through something similar, and he has this very successful uncle that had told him once that if you weren't doing exactly what you want to do by a certain age, you were probably never going to do it. And for someone like him to say that, and knowing the life that he lives, because he had this very successful aftermarket car parts company, and then now all he does is fly airplanes around and kind of as his hobby. So he's living this great life, and I'm sure he's seen that many times in some of his peers, and people within his network as he kind of grew his company. So that really stuck with me, and eventually I made the plunge and just started helping a few people out with doing their books, and really making an effort to connect with various founders, investors, other entrepreneurs. As he started really getting the swing of things during COVID, which may or may not have been a good thing in that you couldn't meet anyone. But since I'm running in a remote accounting company, like that actually was in my favor, and that people were more open to working remotely. And what's funny is during that time of COVID, I met more people than I've ever met in my life because of the ease of virtual networking and just really like getting out there to meet other people. Um, and I found a few groups that were focused on networking within the Southern California area, which is where I'm located right now. And that really helped me build my network in the LA area because at the time I was still fairly new. I did spend high school and college years in the LA area, but I went up to the Bay Area for so long that most of my professional work network was in the Bay Area. So coming back down to LA, I had to rebuild that and um, yeah, figure that out to basically have more reach and get to know more people. And at first, it was a little difficult and started slowly, but a lot of those people I met early on, I would consider good friends now, also.
You know, Jesse, I realized something. I'm like digging in and asking you so many questions, but just putting myself in the shoes of our audience, they're probably really confused. So what does Jesse do? So could you could you frame this a little bit for us? So what do you do? It might not be just one thing. Could you help our audience understand? So what is Jesse up to?
Well, I run Avano, and really what Avano does is not too different from what I used to do within the software companies where I'd be running finance. So essentially, Avano is a fractional accounting team for the companies that we work with. So we'll take care of everything from closing the books to doing their accounts payable, accounts receivable, reaching out to all their vendors for them and customers for them, and taking the lift away from the founders, so they don't have to worry about it, and essentially run it as if they had an internal finance team doing everything. We do it with the emails of our clients so that it looks like they have a much bigger team than they actually do. And we give them this more professional polish on the accounting side to help them seem like they have leveled up on that side of the business. In addition, we also take care of all the business compliance and tax compliance for them. So we're able to put everything into one organization so you don't have to deal with two different accounting contacts, one for your books and one for your taxes, like most people have. It was something that I felt was important to just make the experience better for people. And so that's what accounting Avano the business does. What I do within Avano and also with some of our clients is basically just making sure everything runs so the founders don't have to worry about it. And for a few of the clients that get more actively involved in their actual operations or their future directions, so it makes me excited to be actually part of those journeys and to have one foot in the accounting space and one foot in the technology space and be able to do those two things simultaneously. Is a fractional accounting team for the companies that we work with. So we'll take care of everything from closing the books to doing their accounts payable, accounts receivable, reaching out to all their vendors for them and customers for them, and taking the lift away from the founders so they don't have to worry about it. And essentially run it as if they had an internal finance team doing everything. We do it with the emails of our clients so that it looks like they have a much bigger team than they actually do. And we give them this more professional polish on the accounting side to help them seem like they have leveled up on that side of the business. In addition, we also take care of all the business compliance and tax compliance for them. So we're able to put everything into one organization so you don't have to deal with two different accounting contacts, one for your books and one for your taxes, like most people have. It was something that I felt was important to just make the experience better for people. And so that's what accounting Avano the business does. What I do within Avano and also with some of our clients is basically just making sure everything runs so the founders don't have to worry about it. And for a few of the clients that get more actively involved in their actual operations or their future directions, so it makes me excited to be actually part of those journeys and to have one foot in the accounting space and one foot in the technology space and be able to do those two things simultaneously.
That's awesome. We should have started there because now everybody understands. Oh, now I get why Jesse's on this podcast. Great. No, this is pretty amazing that you carved out that sort of unique role in the startup ecosystem. How does Avano make money then? Is it by getting equity? Do you get paid cash? Is it a mix of everything? Could you mind sharing that?
Yeah, I mean, if for equity, that could be part of it for the ones I'm more hands-on working with, but mostly it is accounting services on a monthly type of fee. So we don't bill hourly. We do value-based pricing on a monthly fee. Typically, we'll assess people's existing books to understand what the transaction volume is and complexity is. We'll do a fairly thorough assessment in the beginning to understand what we're getting ourselves into and to make sure we're offering a fair price to the client. And from there, we'll make a presentation in terms of these are our findings. This is the pricing that we're going to suggest. Like, what flavor would you like? Do you want this more bare bones bookkeeping type of service, or would you like the full package where we just do everything for you? Hopefully, they choose the one where we do everything for them, and that's where the real value is. And that's typically how it works in terms of how we make money on, and really on the tax side is typical of like most tax organizations. We're experimenting with a few things now to kind of change up the way we operate a little bit. But really, I think that's because we're looking for a more ideal client profile to be working with. I came together with another business partner about a year and a half ago, almost 2 years now. She handles the tax strategy side of the business, and we've become a very good partners in working together. But we've found that where our value is the most powerful are companies that are not solopreneur type companies, but companies that have a handful of employees, and meaningful revenue, or an ability to make meaningful expenses because of the funding they have. If the company is too small, the concerns of the founder may not understand the complete value that we deliver, because until you've actually managed a company that actually needs a full accounting team or is of that size, you may not actually understand the value of accounting at all. And just like most people, it's just a cost that you must bear with. It may not be exactly an organization that provides value unless you've had that experience before, kind of like the culture thing.
I mean, so what is an ideal type of client in this situation? I get that it's not a solopreneur, people who understand the value of accounting. Does that mean that it has to be usually a certain size? Is it usually a Series A, B? Is that how you label it? What's a very good rule of thumb to understand, oh, these are the type of clients that should be working with Jesse in this firm?
So ideally for us, it's usually we say software and service companies, and that those typically are more remote friendly. If there's a revenue range, it's typically anywhere from could be about 5 to 15 million or so. I think we can go a lot higher than that if we need to. Our biggest customer is 20 to 30 million in revenue, but at that point, you start bringing the accounting department in house and not necessarily need to outsource it. Too much smaller than that, there's not as much of a value placed on the accounting organization. So we find that in the sweet spot in the middle, we tend to do really well, because if you are hiring finance people at that stage of your growth, to me, it's a little too early, because there's not enough for them to do unless they have their hands into other areas of the business, or and are actually helping the operations improve. They're probably just sitting there. And for most companies, it's not a good idea to have just one person working on the books, because that's how you create an environment that's really easy um, to have fraud. So when you see that, like, no one's checking over this one accountant's work, and it's easy for them to steal. So ideally, you have at least two people, so there's this check against the other person. But then two people with the salaries of what they're becoming is pretty costly if you're also trying to bring on marketing people or engineers at the same time.
Absolutely. So and thus they look for firms like Avano, right?
Yes. Yep.
So,
Yeah.
well, okay, without revealing too much if it's sensitive information, but just because these juicy kind of data is what our audience members would love to actually know. So, what would be an average check size or annual type of revenue that Avana brings in? Just something that'll get an estimate of, wow, that's a sexy business.
Well, the numbers are not necessarily the greatest right now, in that we are still a growing company, and we would like to see our revenue go into several million, and we have certain goals in mind. But I think the sexiest part is the margin. So we are able to take home 30 to 40% fairly easily. And for a service company, like, that's really good. So I mean, one of the reasons why I picked accounting in particular, even though in the beginning I shied away from it, you read enough out there that this is one of the higher margin types of businesses. So if you're doing it right, it's fairly easy to be profitable from day one. Most of the software companies I was at were never profitable, so I saw it on that kind of side of way of doing business. And it's interesting that even though this is smaller scale, because it's profitable and somewhat easy to get started, it was just very attractive. And of course, I already knew that how to do a lot of the things within an accounting company, so it just was the natural choice to go that direction. Once I realized, like, yes, I do know a lot about this, I probably should be helping people with this.
That's fantastic. Well, tell me this. How are you, Jesse, or Avano leveraging Asia?
So one of the first things that I remember when I went on that with one of these companies got acquired was that we had a meeting with our new accounting team, And none of them were actually based in the office of the company we were acquired by. They were all in the Philippines. So that, even though I had worked in other companies before where we had a lot of teams worldwide, and especially like a support center in India and things of that nature, I had not worked with anyone from my organization that was overseas yet until that point. And what was interesting about that experience was that the teams in the Philippines did all the actual work, and the people in the headquarters, all they did was manage the process and experience. So that was really interesting to me. And as I went through the years, I actually ended up helping another friend of mine who had acquired an accounting firm kind of figured out ways they could go to potentially increase their profits. And leveraging overseas accountants was one of the major ways to do that. And I had seen a few companies start on this already, but it was not quite as popular as it is now. But it made complete sense in that the same things I looked for in the US, I could probably find in Asia if I'm looking hard enough. So, what I mean by that is people with Big Four experience that are capable of doing accounting at a high level and had some industry experience that they could also leverage. Basically, the similar type of profile that I would look for people to join my teams. And of course, Philippines, very strong English abilities. So it was a natural choice to move that direction for hiring and considering to build a team from. So yeah, it's been great. And I think I've been fortunate in that a couple of my most early hires have turned out to be some of the best ones. I like to think I'm good at hiring, but I probably got really lucky with those two. And it's been great since bringing them on, and they're actually still with the team right now. So really, really excited to still be working with them.
Wow. So the way you leveraged Asia, if I'm just summing this up and coining it correctly, you know how most tech companies, they would actually have maybe some of their team, their tech team in India or in
Hmm.
Ukraine, in another country. But in this situation, you've seen a company that had its accounting team, its finance team in the Philippines, right?
Yes.
And you learned from that and you modeled it and you've executed something similar.
Yes. Yeah.
That's amazing. Actually, probably a lot of people that's mind blow for them. Um, that you are very humble. You say, yeah, you like to think that you're good at hiring, but you just got lucky. Can I actually ask you this? I mean, what are some things that you look for when you hire somebody to ensure that you're hiring someone with a good fit?
That's tough to say in that every interview is a little bit different, but I believe what's common. I mean, obviously, you want to make sure they're capable of doing the job. That's a basic thing. But beyond that, making sure they're a good culture fits and that they have some sort of extra quality that makes them an amazing person to work with. Maybe that is something where they're someone that doesn't give up easily, or someone who is always taking more on and is hungry for that. Those are some of the qualities that would stand out that you look for. In addition to the culture piece of, does this person need to be someone that takes all the glory, or are they a really good team member? Is this someone that I would want to work alongside of? Because everyone is okay working in a company when everything's going well. Company's making money, like maybe there's plenty of staff, so no one's like buried with work. And in those situations, it's easy for the team to be in a good mood. But what if things don't go well? What if you had like the three worst sales months of the company's history? Or what if the industry is contracting and you see all these other competitors failing? The mood in those situations is not quite the same, and for some people, it's easy for them to be like, okay, I'm just going to jump ship and find something else. Especially when I was in Silicon Valley, that was so easy to do. But the ones that were really good at what they did and still dedicated and willing to figure out things to make it to the other side, that's a really important quality. And you can't always find it in that. It's easier for most people to just find the better organization or company, like, but better job to go to. But sticking it out and having that grit and figuring it out, that's hard. And if you can find that within any of the team members, that's a really good trait to have, because if I have to fight this fight, like, this is someone that can fight along with me.
Mm-mm. Actually, that's true. It's so rare, right, for people to actually want to fight the fight. Um, Yesterday I walked into a bank and I met the teller or the service provider, and she had worked at the same bank for 26 years.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, wow, do you see that these days? That's very rare.
Very rare,
But
yeah.
it's not. And then when you talk to her, it's not. She's not a loser, right? She's smart. She's wicked smart. She's very professional, super well cut out, and just you could tell she's high quality individual. Very sharp. And yet she decided to stick there. And I think she reflected a lot of the traits that you just mentioned. Um, and it's hard, right? It's essentially hard. So, going back to the whole leveraging Asia bit. So you say you're born in Taiwan, correct?
Yes.
So how many languages do you speak?
Uh, Two and a
Two and a
half.
half. Wait, how does that work? Tell me a little
No.
more about that. Wait, what?
English and Mandarin is no problem. I took French in high school, but at this point, I probably can't speak it. I can still read most of it if I needed to. So, and then surprisingly, I know a little bit of Taiwanese just because I was around my grandparents when they spoke it. So I can definitely catch things here and there, but definitely not able to have conversations in it. So that's why I like to joke that it's two and a half.
I see. No, wouldn't that mean it's three? At least, a little bit of French and a little bit of Taiwanese. Put that together, that's one. So,
Yeah, I don't know if
yeah.
those two even get to a 50%, but I get what you're
Oh,
saying.
I see, I see, I see. Okay, I give you too much credit. Oh,
Yeah.
I see. Oh, how much does speaking a language, how much did that contribute to your ability to leverage Asia?
I mean, with the Philippines, you don't have to think about the language piece quite as much because their English ability is so strong. Um, I do think a lot about how I'm saying certain things so it comes across the right way. But more the challenge with that has been more of cultural norms in the workplace being a little different than I have had issues with language itself. I do have another client where they have a software team in Vietnam, and sometimes in that situation, the language situation is a little bit more difficult in that you have to be more accommodating to people who have not yet mastered the language. But in general, I haven't found it to be a problem in that most people who are serious about their career will make that effort to really learn that language. Of course, there's several people on the team who are not quite as strong, but you can see that the effort is there to figure out how to communicate and everything. So for the most part, I haven't found it to be too big of an issue. Um, so that's been great, and I think other countries, people are more forgiving about you not knowing their language. I think in the U.S. it's not quite the same, whereas Americans typically like people speaking English, like so you get more of a pass in that kind of setup. And when I am in the Philippines visiting the team, they're usually speaking in Tagalog with each other anyway. So like I'm just there, but like kind of do their own thing. And there's probably all these chats happening that I can't see where people are doing work in their local language. But I mean that's totally fine.
Yeah, so you're comfortable, essentially, not speaking that local language hasn't necessarily added or detracted from your leverage Asia experience, correct?
Not at all. Yes, yeah, I haven't found it to be a major issue.
Yeah, I think also that's maybe because you've also found a comfortable role in there. Um, it's funny when I talk to some people who actually leverage the language and like, yeah, it's essential. But I find a lot of people saying it wasn't essential too,
Mm,
told me that it's about teamwork. There are some people who will speak the local language and some people who won't, but it's about the different strengths coming together and collaborating. And maybe it
yes,
goes back to your terminal culture.
yeah. I mean, it's also important to be culturally sensitive and kind of knowing and understanding those other people. And one of the benefits of working in Silicon Valley was that you have people from all over the world working in the companies there. So it was truly a melting pot. So all the types of people I work with now, I worked with in Silicon Valley also. So it wasn't too much of a difference. And then because of that experience, I think I'm really good with accents. Like any sort of accented English, it's actually fairly easy for me to understand. Um, yeah, maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah, there you go. Now that makes it a full three languages then maybe, because you speak the different Englishies. Well, but that's definitely a talent because my partner, Simon, actually says, "Oh, I'm having a tough time understanding that English." And I'm sitting there going, I get it. And maybe it's because of my training with my parents and their broken English, but
Mhm.
I definitely am with you. The different Englishes, it's an ear that you can grow. Um,
Yes.
yeah, then, why should more people, because I believe this, and if you don't agree with the general statement and the kind of the leading question here, feel free to break it.
Mhm.
Why should more people be thinking, at least entertaining the possibility of leveraging Asia?
Well, I think there's multiple reasons for that. In that, especially like in Southeast Asia, there's a lot of growth right now. So these economies and populations are growing really rapidly. So it gives you exposure to things that are happening outside of the immediate area that you're in. And because of the different costs of living in these areas, you're able to do things as a company that you wouldn't normally be able to do at certain stages. Using software companies as the example, and I think it's one of the better examples, to create a really strong software company in the US, especially in the San Francisco Bay Area, is enormously expensive. But for what you could get for one engineer in the San Francisco Bay Area, you could potentially have 5 to 10 engineers in a place like Vietnam. So you can get a lot more for your money. And if you're not raising a ton of money, or if you have a limited amount, perhaps through like a friends and family type of round, you really want to be able to stretch that as much as you can. Because to build something like that in the US, you would need a lot more investment to make it work. And then there's the recruiting challenge on top of that, too.
You're absolutely right. The recruiting challenge on top of that in the US, especially because it gets competitive, right, for some of the talent. And there aren't unlimited supply of tech talents. But you're right. When it comes to building, I see that too. Um, have you heard of the term when you want innovation or when you want to start a new business within the business, you either build it, you buy it, or you partner, right? Familiar with
Yeah,
that framework?
definitely.
Um, so, obviously when you build, using some of the engineers in Asia could be more cost efficient. That makes sense. Um, when does it make sense to buy, do you think, instead of trying to build everything? And how would Asia play into that in your uh, kind of experience and knowledge?
I think if you are a larger company that is looking to have an entire division potentially be outsourced, that could be a time to potentially look at another organization to acquire, in that there you would be getting a lot of existing infrastructure and talents to bolt onto your company. To build it all on your own and hire everyone sometimes is quite a bit of a challenge. So having something that's ready to go that you can bolt on would maybe work out better. But I think it really just depends on the company and what their initiatives are. So this is just me kind of saying that based on what your question that you just asked. But there's a lot of other factors that could go into that kind of decision.
I appreciate you entertaining that question. I really had no direction in going that. I was just curious just because as a finance, accounting, tech entrepreneur guru that you are, I'm pretty sure you've seen more instances of businesses. Like you get to almost perch on the shoulders of different entrepreneurs and different business folks and see things. That's why I asked, what are when should you build versus when should you buy, right? I think there's a um, bias in some cultures where, why buy something when I can build it myself? You know, when that's not true. In fact, do you find this statement to be true? I certainly thought this true of a lot of Asian companies out there. It's even conglomerates. They were like, I'd build it myself rather than buy. You know, I'll
Yeah,
just
I've
build
heard
it
that.
in house.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why do you think that is? I mean, that's where I'm confused.
Sometimes I think that's just the ego of the executives within the company. So you get into this high position within that company, you have to prove yourself, and rather than having this vendor take the glory, you may want it to be for yourself. I can remember on this one client where that was the case where they had a really important customer that was a big household name, but their management team internally all changed and they wanted to bring everything back in house because they had this strong need to look really good because there was a new CEO, new management, everyone was new and everyone had their own KPIs to hit. So and rather than betting on this startup that they didn't feel comfortable about, they rather just figure it out themselves or uh, partner with a really big name so that if anything goes wrong, they can just say, well, no one ever fails working with this company, so that it's not nothing we could do. Bad economic times.
You know, it's oftentimes I think people think building is cheaper, maybe too, but there are times when actually it's cheaper to buy than to build, right? And it's hard to say what exactly, I guess it's business is so detail specific that it's hard to say at what point for what companies is it right to buy versus build. But I definitely, would you agree with this statement? Um, More companies in America are willing to both build and buy, but in comparison to Asia, companies in Asia, American companies and American CEOs and executives are much more willing to buy than
Mhm.
as compared to Asian CEOs and executives. Would you say that's true?
I think for the most part that's true.
Oh, why? I think both you and I think that's true, but and again, because of your finance background and like, you've seen much, I'm asking this, like, let's get into this a little bit. Why do you think that's the case? I never cracked this one.
I mean, it could be that in general you don't see that quite as often in terms of businesses being sold quite as much as within the US. So that's not necessarily as common. So that it's not a default strategy that people move towards. Um, and it's just not part of the business culture, I think. And it could also be that contract law may not be quite as strong out there. So to put a deal like that together and make sure it is completely successful may not be as easy as it is in the US. And perhaps the corporate structures are not maybe as easy to kind of roll up in the same way. Um, I don't know enough about that to really get into the detail, but the way things are in the U.S., it's already very easy for companies to acquire each other. There's very clear rules about that, and it's something that's been happening for quite a while already within this market.
Actually, I think that's an insightful statement you made there. The corporate law and contract law structures does impact it. I mean, it's just interesting, and I think you're an ideal person to kind of dig in, and I did dig in because, I mean, you just talked about what was it, Wildfire. I mean, that got Google bought that company instead of building it in house, right?
Yes, yeah.
And
That was
but
actually a really good example in that that was the height of Facebook's popularity at the time. Social media was the kind of really big thing around 2012 within the US. I think that's when Facebook had the most searches on the Google search engine. And because Google had not been successful with Google Plus at the time, this is just my opinion or perception of what happened, but they needed a win in the social media space, and they were going to get it by building it. They already tried, didn't go anywhere, so it made sense for them to go out there and gobble up other companies. And I remember at the time, Oracle was also doing the same thing. So Oracle bought the number one and three companies in the space. Google snatched up Wildfire, which was number two in the space at the time. And I know another bunch of companies also got acquired in that time span as well. So that's when social media marketing SaaS was very hot and right place, right time for the company. But yes, Google definitely was not going to build it themselves, and it was easier for them to acquire it. And with it, they also got a really amazing team and a lot of engineering talent because the company was really well run. So for them, I don't know if the acquisition panned out the way they had anticipated, but it was good from the standpoint of they got a lot of very good team members to join the organization.
Mm. No, it sounds like they tried to build it, it didn't work, so they bought, right? Uh,
Yeah.
and buying was a good move because of all this amazing talent. It's true. I think that's one of the biggest benefits of an acquisition, if done correctly, is you get this infusion of amazing talent and people. In addition to that, another reason that a lot of, and this is again because of your accounting background, when you acquire a company, you can also take claim ownership of their revenue, right?
Yes.
And that's a strategy that I see often. So can you kind of speak a little more about that? Is that something that's common and good? Do you think that's a good strategy, something healthy for people to do? Or do you think, is there some general warning that you have against that?
I think it depends on the situation also, but
Yeah. Spoken like a
um,
good accountant. Yeah.
but it really depends on if the two companies have an alignment that makes sense, right? So if you're
Mm.
acquiring a business in a completely different industry just to gain the revenue, that doesn't necessarily make sense, and you may have culture clash in integrating the companies. So it is something you want to think about before moving ahead because uh, it's important that you can integrate the company and that there is alignment in the future direction of both organizations. Otherwise, I don't necessarily see how it makes sense because ultimately it's more about creating value. So even though you have the revenue, who's to say that this acquisition doesn't lead to certain customers dropping off because they don't want to be associated with that parent company? You don't necessarily know that. So um, yeah, I think this one's a tough one in that it really depends on the situation, and the revenue isn't all the solely important thing also because I'm sure profitability also matters. So you want to make sure that like it's profitable to, and if you care about profitability within your own company, if you're one of those VC-backed companies that never made anything anyway, maybe it doesn't matter as long as the growth metrics look good, and so you can take on more losses as long as you're hitting that growth every year and hitting the hockey stick basically. So it depends on the situation, the industry, and the players involved. So
Yeah. Okay. No, that's true. I wish there was a clear-cut answer. Like, right? You know how they say, there's some formulas out there, for example. They say like, hey, if your revenue is not around 2 million, then maybe you shouldn't be raising Series A. So they have these rules of thumbs. But I guess it's
mhm.
hard to put a rule of thumb with whether you should build or buy. Um, and I kind of seek these heuristics because I feel many Asian companies and startups or big conglomerates and corporations should be buying more companies in America, right? If they want to expand into the US,
Yes, yeah.
rather than try to build everything. Because I feel that cultural gap makes it very difficult for a lot of these Asian powers to come to America and succeed.
Mhm.
Um, no, I mean, how do you feel about that statement I just made?
Well, I mean, the work culture in a lot of Asian companies is very different from the work culture in America, and I think that alone makes it a challenge in that what executives of an Asian company can expect from the workers is probably not exactly the same what they can expect of American workers. And then you run into challenges with that because there's that, just different ways of management and different philosophies and how workers are. So it is challenging for Asian companies to come to the US and succeed in that way.
So therefore, they probably should entertain buy a little more. I mean, we're skipping the whole partner aspect too right now. Yeah, they could partner, right? Um, it's not always just buying and building. You could partner,
Yes.
and I think that's also something that you're doing. Actually, I think Avano's partnering, correct, with all these companies.
I mean, we've had to partner with a company that we've worked with in the Philippines for a very long time, and that because we are US based, we're not able to have an entity in the Philippines that easily. So we actually work through them to do all of the HR and payroll type even though the employees are completely dedicated to what we do, without them, it would be extremely hard for us to actually function because we wouldn't be able to give all the team members one HR experience, and they have their own version of Social Security and benefits that they need as well. So to me, that was important in terms of I would want them to have the things they would have at a regular job that are important to them also. So it was very instrumental to have this other company partner with us to allow us to work through them.
Yeah, and that goes right back to culture. You wanted to build an environment where people didn't want to be treated more poorly than their equals and peers in the Philippines, right? So that
Well, there's
speaks to.
that, and then but then also there's, and then maybe this was a thing from Wildfire. It's an organization that cares about excellence quite a bit too. So it's not just that you had to be cool around, but you had to be good at what you did, right? You had to be good at your job, very capable, in addition to being fun to be around, and that really stuck with me. In that, remember, pretty much everyone in the company was like that. And what really stuck out to me about the culture at Wildfire and at Google was that the cultures of those two companies were very similar. So this is Google back in the earlier days, and the culture I think was a lot stronger back then because it wasn't 50, 60,000 people. But it seemed like everyone was super intelligent, cared a lot about what they were doing, and just fun to be around. And those organizations, I believe that people come together to solve problems more quickly because Google was like anywhere else that I worked at in that it's chaos all the time everywhere, right? Maybe it's better controlled now, but there's always people like running around figuring things out, fires to put out. But the main difference was people cared enough to do it more quickly. And because they had a, I don't know, maybe better camaraderie with each other compared to other companies, not totally sure, but things got fixed very quickly or addressed very quickly. And I think that has a lot to do with just the type of people that were there.
Mm. Just for context, what year were you at Google?
This was back in 2012.
Okay, so at 2012, culture was very different actually than it is
Yeah.
today. So that makes sense that you made that statement. Um, how many of your clients at Avano right now are based in Asia versus based in America? Percentage split or parity?
I mean, the majority are based in the US, but some of them have Asian operations or teams. So maybe some of them have customer support teams out there. Some of them have software teams out there. Others work with various marketing agencies or outsource another piece of maybe even their sales team to the Philippines or elsewhere. So a lot of the customers, I would say at least a third to a half of them mix that in some way. So maybe we were working with more forward-thinking types of customers, but it is something that we see in many of the clients that we work with.
I see. So then why out in Asia so much? I mean, I met you first in Asia. No, I mean, we're both in the States right now doing this interview, but I saw you first in Asia. In fact, the second time I saw you was in Asia too. So
Yes.
why do you go to Asia so much?
Um, well, we met in Vietnam, and one of the things that stands out to me about Vietnam is that the you can feel this energy in the city of Ho Chi Minh City, and it reminds me a lot of China when it was still going through rapid growth. So kind of like the earlier days of China, maybe late 90s, early 2000s back then. And it's really interesting to be around that kind of energy. And in the US, it feels like things are not trending in a great direction, but there's much more optimism, I think, in Asia because there's so much growth at the moment. And one of the reasons why I went to Vietnam in particular is one of the clients that I work more closely with, Pascal Studio, they have their engineering team based there. And so I would go to visit the team and get to know the some of the customers that are out there, and also get to know our advisors that are based out there as well. And I also know that Vietnam in particular is churning out a lot of engineers from their universities every year. And so for me, I wanted to see what this client of mine was up to understand how he was building his software team. And He had been working with this software team in Vietnam for probably like 3 4 years at that point. So I just really wanted to understand like what he was doing if I was to go down that path of creating a software company and maybe wanting to take a similar model to what he was doing.
Hmm. So I see. It was a business trip in some ways because it was with Pascal Studios. A big
Yep.
fan for obvious reasons, and recently big deals happened there. But also because you were curious, you wanted to learn about this phenomenon. Um, how many countries in Asia have you visited? I'm sure Taiwan and China, like China in general, politically, I don't know
Yeah.
how that stands.
Been,
Vietnam.
been to Japan, Korea, China, Cambodia, Vietnam, Philippines, Singapore. I guess I saw Malaysia, but it was just that little bit across the water from Singapore, so not all that much. But I actually visited Vietnam back in 2016, and that was the first time. And then to me, it's actually really remarkable how much it changed between that point and when I last went back. I think it was maybe 2022 was the second time I went back there, and there was an enormous change in terms of the skyline was completely different. I remember the first time I flew over Ho Chi Minh City, I was like, wow, this city's kind of flat. There's no tall buildings, and that kind of stood out to me. And then the next time I came out, I was like, wow, it's all different now. There's all these skyscrapers, and that was really interesting. And you could feel the energy back then, but I think now with like all the high rises and then building the metro and everything, like you can see much more development. And even outside the city, as you fly in, you can see a lot more developments out there.
Yeah, it's just super exciting. I'll never forget that growth and seeing the different things. And even to this day, it's just nonstop, the energy. It's just buzzing all the time. Um, quickly, I'm gonna give you, this is like almost like a kind of like a mission. I'll give you a minute. Could you just highlight each of these countries and the kind of the amazingness of each of these regions you've been to for people who've never been there, right? So two things. One sentence about like China, blah blah blah, and then name your favorite food there. Ready? I'll give you 1 minute, okay? I made it difficult. Yeah, I know it's hard, but let's try this challenge. Ready?
So
Um,
one really cool thing about the country, and then one food I really like there.
yep.
Is that it,
Yes, sir.
or
All
one thing that
right.
stands out about the country?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
with
yeah.
China, I think it was you don't understand the idea of there being a lot of people until you go to a place like China and you realize, wow, there's freaking people everywhere. Like just the scale and how massive everything is, it kind of blows your mind until you are able to see it in person. Like Shanghai or in Beijing, like the two cities, it was hard for me to comprehend until I actually went there. Like I'm sure there's other giant cities in other parts of the world, but like the just mega cities, the idea of a mega city really hit me when I went to these places and realized like, wow, this is like there's crazy amount of people everywhere. Like it's overwhelming all the time. So that was one thing that stood out. Um, Favorite food there? I mean, there's so much good food, but I think the ones that stood out for me was the Sichuan food from the like the Chongqing, Chengdu type area because in the U.S. Now there's a lot more of those type of restaurants in the U.S., but when I was growing up, you never really saw any of that. Most of the restaurants were Cantonese type restaurants, especially on the East Coast. So I never got to try those type of flavors until I had a chance to actually be out there. So that was really interesting. Japan, I think what's interesting is how organized and everything is and how clean it is. Like there's very strong like cultural norms, I guess, in terms of how people act in public. And it was really interesting to see that. And I mean, the favorite food for Japan is definitely sushi, of course. So that one's an easy one. Yeah. Um, Vietnam, I think one of the things that stood out about Vietnam is what I said earlier about it feels like China as it was starting to open up. So you have this energy that and optimism there that I don't quite see in the U.S. in that it's a lot much more the population is much older, and economy maybe isn't expanding in the same ways. So that was one of the things that really stood out to me. Energy at all hours of the day. It doesn't really matter when. Like there's always like craziness out on the streets, basically. Um, and the food I like there, huh, that's a tough one too. There's certain types of noodles that you can get in Vietnam that you don't necessarily see in U.S. Vietnamese restaurants. Like I don't know exactly the names of them, but like they're so good there. And then the price blows you away sometimes because I remember it wasn't pho, but there's other types of noodles. But I remember this one situation where I was having pho in Vegas the week after I had just come back from Vietnam, and it was literally 10x the price. So
Yeah, yeah. We've hit three countries. We'll stop there, just because I want to get the pressure off. But it's just very telling that you spoke on those three countries. That means to me, those are the top three countries that came to mind for you. Is that fair to say?
top three, and I think that the three are quite different from each other as well. So like easier to highlight differences between the three of them. I mean, Japan can be intense with people also, in that like Tokyo is so gigantic, but it's much more organized, and people are not so abrasive, I guess you could say. So there's that difference in the culture.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, people like to clump Asia together oftentimes when they haven't been. But you're absolutely right. Those three cultures are different. In fact, they're so different. All of the countries, in my opinion, just everything. I mean, we can
Yeah.
find similarities, but they aren't identical. None of the
Yeah.
countries are. Um, yeah.
I think I'm fortunate in that having spent my high school years in the LA area, especially in the San Gabriel Valley, you're surrounded by every type of Asian. So I got a taste of that before actually going to Asia and spending more time out there. When I was younger, I was the only Asian kid in my classes. So it's a completely different experience when I moved from the East Coast to California, and I actually went through some sort of culture shock in that I didn't know that it was possible to have a school with that many Asian kids in it. Because I ended up going to a school in San Gabriel Valley where a lot of the schools are over, like there are 50% plus Asian students. And I remember thinking, oh, it's gonna be like 10, 15% at most. And then when I got there, it kind of blew my mind. It was like, oh wow, like this is completely not what I expected. It's like I'm actually living in Asia.
Yeah, I think for me, I was born and raised in LA area. Well, not LA proper, but more the suburbs of LA. And I remember wanting to get out of it. I ended up flying all the way to the East Coast. So we kind of traded positions in that. But ultimately, I'm grateful that I got to see that diversity, in fact. I think, and this leads to my next question. You said something about China. You just appreciate, in some ways, that you don't understand what it means to have so many people until you kind of see it and get there. For me, I've never, until I got to China, I think, have been to a place where there's so many people that are Asian,
Mhm.
right? Like just everywhere, right? And for me, though, in terms of just identity, that was powerful actually, because I am of Asian descent. I was never part of the majority, while in the United States. But when I
Mhm.
got to China, I was part of the majority in terms of like race.
Yeah.
And that was another type of diversity that I've never felt in my life, you know? So I guess the question that I want to ask, and I'm not leading this in any direction whatsoever, never, but what are you different in the United States versus when you're in Asia? Are you a different personality or character, or are you the same? Like, I'm curious about that because I'm reflecting on my own experience right now and just wondering what it's like for you because you've clearly been to both regions often enough to have an opinion about this or at least an experience about it.
I don't really think I'm that different of a person in the US or in Asia. Like I'm pretty much the same. Maybe it's a little different in terms of when you're out there just going about day to day life, you approach things a little bit differently. In that, um, maybe I think in the U.S. when you're around U.S. type workers, like there's different expectations and cultural norms than when you're going to a store in Asia. So I think that's the only time where it would come into play. But really, for how I am, it's basically the same. Maybe I try to listen more when I'm in the U.S. In that it's not my I'm not always the loudest person in the room, but I find that that's not too dissimilar than when I'm out in Asia. Also, in that like I'm more listening than jumping in to lead conversations. So I don't know. I think I'm pretty much the same person in both.
You know, I think that's a reflection of maturity. To kind of comment on that, I am also not very different, but it took me a while to get there, I feel. Because when I was younger, I was a different person in different cultures just because I was so trying so hard to reflect what's in front of me. But now, yeah, I am equally loud wherever I'm at. So I guess that's okay. Um, hey, if we may transition a little bit, so what are some exciting projects you're working on? You mentioned Pascal Studios. Can you tell us a little more about that? What's Pascal Studios?
So Pascal Studio creates a anti-money laundering platform for banks in Southeast Asia. Primarily, the countries that the company is focusing on right now are Indonesia, Vietnam, and the Philippines. And we're using the power of Graph AI to basically help these banks with fraud detection so that they're able to fight it a lot more efficiently than they are right now.
That is awesome. So awesome that like I really jumped on board with this one. And no, I'm grateful to you because would not have known about Pascal Studios without your introduction. Um, you know, that kind of opportunity, I think, is also a leverage Asia opportunity, actually, when I think about it, because, I mean, a company like Pascal can exist because of the different people with different insight and experiences coming together and seeing an opportunity in Asia. So, I mean, okay, people have no idea what I'm talking about without more detail there. So, could you tell me a little bit about the team and how what I just said makes sense? Why is it that it's all these different people with different perspectives coming together to solve a problem in Asia, and that's a big leverage Asia kind of moment?
Well, the what the team is building out there, I think that not a lot of software teams in Asia have experience building. So the founders of the company are from companies in Silicon Valley where they had built for Fortune 500, Fortune 100 type companies. So they understood difficult requirements and how to navigate those type of challenges while creating world class type of software. So the approach and mentality is a little different than what you would see from people maybe locally within Vietnam itself. I remember attending this like a tech talk type thing in Ho Chi Minh City a few months ago, where one of the things that they stood out was that people from Silicon Valley come in with this, like, I don't know, say like big ego, but like they are extremely confident because they've seen the promised land before, right? Like they've been there, they've done that already. They've been at winning companies. They have dominated their industry, and they have gone from idea all the way to just running everything, right? So the idea of a small team changing the world and actually doing it, it's hard for a lot of companies to actually know that that can happen. Whereas for the Silicon Valley type people, that's just a normal day, right? Like, we do this all the time. So having that mentality plus the actual expertise to build something very, very advanced sets us apart from a lot of the other businesses that are out there. And I know there are U.S. companies that try to get into this space that Pascal is in right now, but because there's so many markets for them to focus on, some of them underinvest in Southeast Asia in particular, because when you look at the Asian market, you may not think of the Southeast Asian market as the primary one to go after. There's plenty of more, I guess you would say, more developed economies that you could target first, and that U.S. companies have more of a comfort working within because of other experiences they had before there. So you tend not to focus as much on these countries, but the the populations and economies are growing incredibly fast, and within banking, they are actually acquiring many more customers at a faster rate. So like this needing to fight fraud and its increasing prevalence is extremely important.
Wonderfully outlined, and that's exactly what I was trying to point out at that. I mean, I think that opportunity would not have come about without people in Silicon Valley with the right exposure and experience and seeing that there's like a need, an unmet need in Southeast Asia and pouncing at that opportunity is just, I think it was magical to see that all kind of come in to what I know today as Pascal Studio. Um, yeah, I know it's getting late, but just a few more questions just to kind of
Yep.
wrap
Yeah,
things
no problem.
to full circle. Um, so what is the future of Avano look like for you now? What are some exciting things around the corner?
Well, in general, we're just excited for the growth of the company, and beyond just the regular services that we do want to put on more events and just connect more people with each other. So that's something I'm looking forward to, and that I love grabbing good food with people. So we're probably going to be doing that across all of LA more often than we already are. We do already host a few lunches, but I think we want to formalize it into something bigger. Maybe even throw parties, and that Anna and I feel very comfortable in those type of like situations and environments. So we love seeing people have fun and bring them together. So we might lean into that a lot more. And then working with some of the partners that we have that are fun to be with and also are within a similar space. So just being able to grow together and help everyone on their entrepreneurial journeys. And I think that's actually the thing that excites me the most, really, is that statement I just made of being meeting more people, other entrepreneurs, and working together to get to a shared goal. Maybe even though goals are probably different from each person, but working together and basically helping each other get to where we need to go. Because you life is much more interesting in that way, in that you're always helping someone, you're feeling good about that you're helping someone, and then you feel good about the time you're spending with those people also. So I think that's what I'm most excited about, is that every day has become much more interesting, and there's always new and fun things to do in addition to areas to grow into in terms of personal development, as well as business development. So there's just so much more ahead in that there's just more building to do. And so it's much more exciting than how I would have viewed my roles within the companies I was at previously.
That's cool. Are you guys hiring people by any chance?
We are hiring people, so I mean, we're always looking for good accountants, tax accountants, and sometimes people in other capacities. So we're always looking for good people, and so if there are awesome people out there who are listening to this that would like to be more in the accounting space, or accounting with a little bit of technology sprinkled into there, then we would love to be able to talk to you.
Yeah, it's not just accounting, it's accounting tech, which is really sexy. It's when accounting meets tech, what happens? Or accounting meets the world of business. Yeah, this is really cool. Um, what are some books, some movies, some good entertainment, Netflix, podcasts that you've been listening to lately that you like to share with the world?
Um, the time to absorb is not what it used to be, but I think I do gravitate a lot towards business type books, and more so than other. I used to be an avid fiction reader, actually. So when I was really young, I would read books all the time, every day, like late into the night, and it was just something I really loved to do. Um, and then somewhere along the way, that joy of reading didn't quite stay as strong as I would have liked to hope. But I know one book that I had read fairly recently, that kind of stuck out to me was one called Extreme Ownership. It's where a book written by, I think it was a group of Navy SEALs, but I'm not. I think it was Navy SEALs, where they basically took military principles and applied them to business. And then a couple of things that really stood out was, one, in a strong team environment, you need to be able to say stupid things and ask stupid questions, because if you don't, in a military setting, people might die. So in the business, it's probably not, the stakes probably aren't that high, but I've seen a lot of teams that are not totally functional because there were people who were afraid to say certain things or ask certain questions, and then the projects didn't go exactly as planned. And if you had an environment that was similar where you could just say whatever you needed to say, ask any stupid question you needed to ask, because your intention was to make sure the mission was successful, things would go a lot better. So, I mean, that was one of the nuggets that came out of reading that book. And I could see how it could really apply to a few different teams I was working with.
I'm gonna look up that book. I am like a secret fan of Navy SEALs anything. And
Okay,
so
yeah.
no, I know I'm gonna love that book. It's like best of everything, Navy SEALs business. Um, hey, again, before we sign off, three pop quiz questions, and I'm trying to make this a thing. So and you're the first person I'm experimenting this on, so here it goes. Ready? Some pop quiz questions. Ready? Um, so which U.S. president, right, or U.S. presidents spoke multiple languages?
I don't know if I know the answer to this one. I know some of the earliest ones spoke French. um, I'm guessing it's the ones that, well, they weren't presidents until later, but the ones that went to work with the French in during the Revolutionary War. The names are escaping me, and that it was a long time ago when I studied this. But that's a good question in that when you live in the U.S., it's like other languages don't really matter. So I don't know the answer to that one actually. Um, yeah, sorry.
So would you venture to even take some guesses? I'll give you like, okay, so here's what, it's just to kind of put the stakes up a little bit. For every president that you name correctly, I'll give you up to three. For every president you name correctly, at the end of this, I'm gonna focus on a country that you choose, because you know I'm pulling together a fund for this, and I'll
uh,
invest that exact amount into that country or startups in that country. So for every president that you name correctly, so up to three, um, it'll be a $1,000. Okay, doesn't seem like much, but this will add up. And so this is an ongoing game between every
so
interviewee. Okay,
equation. So it is the president and the language they speak.
president, president alone. I'll give you that president
Yes.
because I want to invest money.
Okay. John Adams,
John Adams, he was fluent in Latin and conversant in French.
blanking on Calvin Coolidge,
Calvin Coolidge, not one of them.
Woodrow Wilson.
Woodrow Wilson was fluent in German, studied Latin, Greek, and Hebrew. So yeah, that's two right there. That's out of three. So $2,000. Okay,
Okay.
um, that's cool. But I mean, a fun trivia fact is, did you know that Herbert Hoover was fluent in Mandarin Chinese?
I did not know that, but I think that was the person I was trying to think of.
Yeah, and so him and his wife would privately converse in Mandarin Chinese while they were in the White House if they didn't want other people to understand.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay, I did
It's
not
pretty
know that.
crazy, right? Yeah, I know. Good trivia fact. Okay, ready? Trivia fact number two, right? What is the average age of people in Vietnam?
I don't completely know the answer to this, but I know it's quite young. So I want to say it's like 21, 22, something like that.
Oh, okay.
Maybe that
That
was years
was
ago. I don't know.
yeah, that would have been another $1,000 for whatever country, lucky country, but it's actually 34 years old.
Oh,
Yeah,
really? Okay. Well,
yeah.
no, never mind.
Yeah, it was 30 like two just a few years ago, but yeah, it seems to be creeping up. Yeah. Okay. Last but not least, how many countries are there in Asia?
How many countries are there in Asia? 30.
Okay, that's actually pretty close. Depending on whether you count the Middle East as part of the Asia, right, continent or Asia nations, it's
Uh-huh.
49
Okay.
if you count them. And if you don't count them, I believe it's 32. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Okay.
Not
So
that bad.
th-
So I'm
we
close.
have $3,000. We have $3,000, and um, you must pick a country in Asia, startups in a country in Asia, and I'm gonna add this to that pool. So which country, startups in which country are lucky to get $3,000 added to their fund pool?
Let's go to Taiwan since I'm from Taiwan.
Taiwan it is. Bam. So
Yes.
I'm gonna keep track of this, and audience members, you guys can keep track of this too. So thanks to Jesse Lin, we have $3,000 in venture capital startup funding allocated for startups in Taiwan. Great job. Okay, hopefully that keeps adding up, right? And then we'll see. I'm thinking once it hits a meaningful, maybe cool 25K or 50K, we'll deploy, you know? Um, all right. Well, Jesse, thank you so much for your time. Um, Before we sign off, are there any closing thoughts you would like to share with our Leverage Asia family community members?
Well, first, thank you for having me on the show and giving me this space to kind of share my thoughts. Um, I guess the only thing I would like to say is that if there are any sort of aspiring entrepreneurs out there that haven't figured out that they want to commit to a lifestyle like that, to figure out a way to commit more fully, because if you truly want to see something like that succeed and change the way your life is right now, you really have to lean in and commit and basically burn the boats and not give yourselves other options if you are comfortable with doing that. But really taking that plunge and into the unknown and going through this crazy journey of personal and business development will really make you into better person than you are now, and maybe even lead you to a more meaningful life. So I think that if anyone out there that's listening to this is thinking about founding their own company and going through that kind of ride, I strongly suggest that they give it a go and definitely commit more fully than they are, because whatever you think will go wrong probably never is what's going to go wrong. And if you are going to need to go back to whatever life you have right now, it's probably not so bad and it's still going to be there.
Well said. I can't agree, I can't disagree with any of the things you just said there. Well, Jesse, we're gonna have you back here. I love having people come back. I think it's only meaningful that these interviews continue at least two more times, right? So I will have you back. In the meantime, thank you so much. And uh, everybody, that was it for Leverage Asia today, and we'll catch you guys next time. All right, guys, have a good one.
One of the benefits of working in Silicon Valley was that you have people from all over the world working in the companies there. So it was truly a melting pot. So all the types of people I work with now, I work with in Silicon Valley also. So it wasn't too much of a difference. And then because of that experience, I think I'm really good with accents, like any sort of accented English. It's actually fairly easy for me to understand.